Andrew Brandt joins us, former Packers VP. He's a professor, writes the MMQB. Okay, take me back 15 years ago. 15 years ago, Aaron Rodgers was in discussion to go number 1 overall to San Francisco. You were in the Packers front office. What was it like leading up to that draft in regards to whether or not you would take a quarterback?
It was eerie 7 days ago because we had the exact same situation to the day 15 years ago. Two things happened that night in 2005, Doug. Number one, we had a bunch of guys we rated first round, and all of them, every one of them except one, gone. We wanted DeMarcus Ware, bad, gone. We wanted Marcus Spears, bad, gone. We wanted this linebacker from Texas, Derek Johnson, gone to the Chiefs. So we're looking at the board as we get to our 24th pick, and it's very clear there's going to be one name up there, and that's the second part that was going on that night. No one, after Alex Smith went number 1, no one was taking Rodgers. So here we were, and the coaches are pulling me saying, Andrew, no way, no freaking way, we can't take a player that can't help us this year, maybe not next year, maybe never. I mean, we had the most durable quarterback in the history of this sport. And then Ted Thompson, our GM, looks at me and says, Andrew, what do we always say? Trust the board. And the board's telling us that's the player.
Right.
So we get him on the phone in 12 minutes, see if the phone rings, make an offer we can't refuse. The phone never rang, Doug. And we took him. And Brett Favre's agent called me. Brett called the coach.
Okay, so Bus Cook calls you. What's he say?
You trying to replace him? What are you doing? What are we doing? And here's the thing. This wasn't just draft night now. 3 years. 3 years, I'm getting the calls from both sides. From the Brett side, it's like, hey, Andrew, do you know what it's like to come into work every day and sit with your replacement? That's no fun. And then from Aaron's side, the simple question was the question I'm sure they're going to get from Jordan Love at some point, which is he ever going to play? Is he ever going to play? And with both sides, you just have to be tactful and professional and just say, just hold on. I understand it's not easy. We just got to deal with this. And I think the bottom line is you can make a lot of arguments where it's good or bad or why they take Love or if he's going to help in the future. All that's fine. We can argue whether they should take a receiver or whatever it is, but this is something, as we did 15 years ago and 14 years ago and 13 years ago, they have to manage. Because now, for the first time I've ever said it, as of 8 days ago, there's an expiration date on Aaron Rodgers with the Packers. That's the only way to look at this.
I look at it as, the old expression, Darryl Royal expression, when you throw the ball, only 3 things can happen and 2 of them are bad, right?
Right.
I look at this as the opposite. Okay, so here's the possible scenarios, right? Aaron Rodgers plays great, and in 3 years, he still wants to keep playing great. Well, Jordan Love's value, unless he's a disaster in the fewer preseason games than we're going to have. Right now, we're not going to have as many preseason games, so we're going to see him very, very little. Worst case scenario for Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers plays great. He wants to stay with the Packers. They want to keep him. They trade him. They'll be able to get value for him throughout those 3 years because he will have learned under Aaron Rodgers, and his arm talent is unmistakable, right? Second scenario, Aaron Rodgers ages, as some believe he started to show last year, and in 2 or 3 years, it appears obvious, and they part ways with him, whether he retires or whether he goes to another team, and he, like Aaron Rodgers, is good enough to continue to carry the baton. Those 2 things do not make it a bad draft pick. The only part where it becomes bad is it ruins the relationship. Aaron Rodgers gets mad, doesn't play well, he leaves, and then Jordan Love stinks. So I look at it as the opposite of the Darryl Royal. 3 things can happen, and 2 of them are actually good.
Well, a couple of differences from our situation, which make it a little bit more problematic. Number one, we were hearing rumors about Brett Favre retiring. I didn't take them seriously, but we hadn't done a new Brett Favre contract since 2001, so we were 4 years removed from it doing any contract adjustment. They just gave Aaron Rodgers the biggest contract in history. And that's where we look at the next 2 years, which means nothing's going to change the next 2 years, even if Aaron plays the worst he could possibly play because of that contract. $31 million dead money if they move on next year, $17 million in 2022, which is still terrible, but they could potentially do it. So 2 years you're locked in. So that makes me wonder, Doug, because we're going to have a reckoning point this time in 2022, and the reckoning point is these two things is going to be a problem: the Aaron Rodgers contract or the Jordan Love draft pick. Because if you move on from the former, you really, you sort of made your bed with a bad contract. You got $17 million on the cap for a guy that's going to be playing somewhere else. And if you move on from the latter, well, what are you going to trade for? A better number one pick after he didn't play for 2 years? That's going to be hard.
Yeah. Andrew Brandt, our guest on the Doug Gottlieb Show on Fox Sports Radio. It's also, there's a couple other differences, though, right? Aaron Rodgers was in discussion to be the number one overall pick, and he fell. That's right. Jordan Love was not viewed as the same type of prospect, right? Like, he is much more of a developmental prospect. Additionally, and you know this, and I kind of tried to relay it, that people have forgotten. Favre did this thing the next couple of years where he retired and then like, no. Or he didn't necessarily retire, but he was non-committal about coming back. And then finally, was after 3 years, after you lose in the NFC Championship game to the Giants, now he retires, and then months later wanted to come back, and it was too late. That's not in part of the plan for Aaron Rodgers, and I don't see him having that sort of lack of commitment the way that Favre has.
Yeah, I think now we know, and we're not going to get into what we got into 15 years ago, because, listen, we cajoled, we implored, we begged, we pleaded, Brett, different of those years, please come back. But when it got to 2008, 2009, it was more, hey, Brett, if you want to play, great. If you don't, let us know. And let us know by the start of free agency. And he kind of got a message that we were ready to turn it over to Aaron, and he retired. And, of course, he unretired, and we had the messy divorce in the summer. But that's not what we're dealing with here. There's no reason to think that Aaron Rodgers is going to move on to retirement anytime soon, and he's playing at a high level, as Brett was. But you're right. Aaron Rodgers fell in our lap, and they traded up to make an affirmative step to get to Jordan Love. And that makes it a little different, too. I just think, as we started, there's got to be some management here. Aaron Rodgers is a pro. He's going to welcome Jordan Love, but he's going to have the same thing Brett had. Right. He's going to come into work every day, sit with his replacement.
There is this narrative that they haven't done enough to get him enough guys. There was a tweet that he's thrown, I think it was like the fewest touchdown passes, or only one touchdown pass in his career to a first-round pick.
Yeah.
Now, look, I defended at the time, and I didn't even add in the fact, forget about all the second-round picks who have been successful. They went and signed Devin Funchess in the offseason as well. So it's not like they haven't gone and tried to improve themselves, and they've tried to fix the offensive line and help the running game, which does provide, it is a benefit to the quarterback. But how accurate is the portrayal that the Green Bay Packers have not provided Aaron Rodgers with enough surrounding talent?
Well, some of that comes right at me because I was part of that front office. Now, again, this is the early years of Aaron, but I pushed back on that stat, that tweet that got a lot of clicks. Listen, we drafted players like Greg Jennings, like Donald Driver, like James Jones, like Jordy Nelson, like Randall Cobb, and more recently Devontae Adams. None of them first-rounders, but if you want to pull up the first-rounders from the years those guys were drafted, I think most of them outperformed them all. So that's why that stat is misleading. But I get it. But listen, Brett would talk to me, this is not new about the Packers. Randy Moss was available. Go get him. Well, Brett, Terrell Owens, go get him, guys. Go get him. And that's just not the Packers. It's just not. They're not the quick fix guys. They're not the guys that are going to go out and get the big name veteran players. They're going to be draft and develop, right, bring up young talent. And it's worked, and that's why I push back on it. It has worked better than quote-unquote first-rounders.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, wait a second. They won 13 games. And by the way, they won 13 games last year. Right? Like, it's not like they're a total disaster. Like, I actually think they're, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I think they're closer to the beginning of a run here than they are to the end where you want to, where they're the Patriots, where you got to throw as much at it and get as much, juice out of the orange as possible. Like Lazard and Valdez-Scantling and Aaron Jones, like those guys are burgeoning stars. Even Devontae Adams isn't old, right? So I would push, and Devin Funchess is 26 years old. Like, none of those guys are 30 years old. I don't understand why there's supposed to be this desperation to go in, what you said, reach for a need, right? Which is the classic thing you're not supposed to do in the draft. He would have been the seventh. They would have taken the seventh wide receiver in the first round, which, oh yeah, by the way, no one else drafted a wide receiver the rest of the first round. They weren't the only ones that saw the value in wide receivers disappearing.
Everyone hated our pick 15 years ago. A lot of people don't like this pick now. And what your point is, okay, so they don't take Jordan Love, they take Michael Pittman, or they take Brandon Ayuk. Does that put them over the hump to make the Super Bowl? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, they hope, will secure the future just like Rodgers did. And the Packers are the most spoiled team in the history of football because they have 30 years of franchise quarterback, and the hope is they have 45 years.
Right. Or you become the Dolphins, you become the Bills. You become one of these teams that's forever searching for the next Jim Kelly, the next Dan Marino. I got two more for you.
Yeah.
First thing is, I feel like Favre somehow has, maybe it's because of how it ended, maybe it's because the interception with the Vikings and he came back for another year. I don't know. Somehow we've gotten to this where people don't talk about Brett Favre as one of the greatest quarterbacks. Like, they still say he's a great quarterback and was one of the, but he's somehow left the discussion of the greatest of all time. Look, I get what Brady's doing, but like Favre or Peyton, I take Favre. I personally take Favre. I know that he was inefficient in comparison to the modern day quarterback, but the position and the sport was played differently. As a guy who now studies the game, but was there for the end of it, am I wrong to think somehow Favre is almost like Isaiah Thomas? He's disappeared from the discussion of the greatest of all time.
I agree. I mean, I wonder if there could be a last dance about Brett Favre.
I agree.
There were so many moments. And again, I got there in '99. He had already been there a few years. He already won Super Bowl. But there was just so many moments where he pulled us out. And I know he threw a bunch of interceptions. But even in the last year, like you just said, we were hosting the Giants in the NFC Championship game in overtime,
right,
a play away from the Super Bowl, to play the undefeated Patriots. So it was like, okay, this guy was bigger than Brady, bigger than anyone in the league at that point. And, yeah, I mean, it's so many comeback wins and so many fourth-quarter drives and so many just walk-off wins with that guy. Listen, we had Southern Mississippi country and we had California cool. You couldn't have two more different, disparate personalities, but both of them. What luck the Packers have had, and fortunate, because these guys are superstars and the hard workers.
Yeah.
Players liked him. I think that's a rap that Aaron should not have. Players like him.
I agree from what I've heard as well. Last thing, when did everybody know on Rodgers? Because the first year, if people remember, the defense was terrible, but the record was bad, right? You come off an NFC Championship game and they didn't win games, but it felt like everyone knew. Did you know before then, during then, while he was still a backup? When did people know he was special?
Doug, 5 days after we drafted him, we had our first minicamp practice. 5 days. He rolls to the right. Donald Driver is running. Had basically the play's over, but he kept running. 60 yards, strike. Ted Thompson has no emotion ever, but I locked eyes with him in that moment. And it was like, oh, my God, we've got it. We've got the guy. And he became a favorite of our front office. In those off seasons you just referenced, Brett would stay in Mississippi basically from January to July. And it was Aaron's team. We saw 2 years of him running the team, and Greg Jennings walking up to the office and saying, oh, my God, this guy, wow, just wow. So he ran the team, and we got comfortable with him, and we were ready to hand him the keys, which we did.
Awesome stuff. Andrew, I hope you and the family are well. Always love your work and love you joining us. Go to mmqb.com if you want to read Andrew Brandt's work. Of course, a longtime vice president in the NFL, working with the Eagles and with the Green Bay Packers. Thanks so much for joining us.